Hello and welcome to Full Disclosure, a podcast project conceived entirely to let me spend more time with interesting people than I would ever get on the radio. Amber Rudd, welcome.
Thank you.
I should get something out of the way early, actually. I've got a mental block on your name. I've called you Amber Heard on air and on stage on one occasion. I said Amber Heard by accident, talking about your second resignation. And
Yes.
It was like, hey, on why? And this sort of weird whisper went around the room. What was he talking about? So if I do, I'm sure I won't.
Well, my daughter tells me it's not a bad mistake to have made against you, as it were, because she is well known as the most beautiful woman in the country.
That must be it.
So there we go. Thanks very much for the compliment.
Hence the confusion. We will begin at the beginning shortly, but it struck me when I was preparing for this conversation that your political career, it burned very brightly, very quickly, didn't it?
Yes.
So there was a period of time when you were absolutely at the centre of everything, but you kind of went from nowhere to the middle and then nowhere again.
Yes. I remember when I was Home Secretary, I first made Home Secretary, and I sat down in the kind of top seat, as it were, at the front in the House of Commons. And Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, came and sat next to me. And I don't think he'd noticed me up till the fact I'd become Home Secretary. And he turned to me and said, "You've risen very fast."
Yes.
I did rise very fast. And I think it's to do with the answer to that question is when somebody said to me, who was, in fact, married to an MP, and she said, "You'll do really well in politics because you're normal." And I thought, well, that's a ridiculous thing to say and slightly insulting. I'm not normal. I'm different. I'm exceptional. But I think being normal, being able to talk normally and articulate your views and then deliver perhaps on what you say can be quite unusual.
Especially now, less so perhaps when you were growing up.
Yes.
It's a particularly abnormal era.
Yes, it is.
Especially on your side of the house, perhaps.
Steady, I think, their side of the house.
Let's save that.
Yeah, exactly.
You've described your childhood as being pretty close to idyllic, I think. Very loving. Dad was a journalist and a stockbroker.
That's right. I mean, I'm always worried about having these sort of conversations, doing a bit of family introspection, because I've got nothing really to say.
There's no trauma in your...
There's almost no trauma. And when I think of any trauma which I dig up, it feels so petty compared to...
It's not that sort of podcast. You don't have to turn up with receipts.
Yeah, no. Okay. I had a really... Basically, there was so much love. Love for my parents, love for my siblings. We're all very close. We support each other. It's a very close and loving family, which is what my mother wanted to support and what we all got.
And she was a magistrate as well
Yes.
as looking after you.
That's right.
So there's a sense of public duty there just in the bones of the family.
Yes, yeah. And quite a serious magistrate. She was on the family court. She had to deal with sudden decisions to do with child protection. So she took it very seriously and rose quite high within that voluntary organisation.
So presumably you had quite grown-up conversations around the dinner table from quite an early age.
Yes, that is certainly the truth. When I looked for my own interest in politics and current affairs, we did. I mean, they weren't actually political, but they were all about current affairs and what's going on internationally or locally. And we all sort of fought for space to have our views heard.
How many
in that.
siblings? I know your brother Roland.
Yes, one of four I am.
Right, okay. Normality notwithstanding, you are quite posh.
Yes.
And I mean, there is a country estate on the CV as well.
There is, yes. Yeah. Yes. Do you want me to apologise for that?
No,
James?
I'm jealous. I think that sounds lovely. How conscious are you of? Because we talk to so many people on this podcast, and something that emerged quite early on is that you only know the childhood you had.
Yes.
Until you're a little bit older and you start comparing your background and your home to other people's. But for many years, that's the only one you know. So the question of whether, I'd ask the same question for someone who grew up in poverty, whether you were conscious of poverty. Are you conscious of privilege when you're growing up?
I don't think you are really, but I'm very conscious of it now.
Sure.
And I think that, it's part of my happy memory is that we had all these advantages, holidays, joys. My father went blind in his sort of peak of his career, and that was a big moment, big drama for the family, and it was very hard, and that sort of readjusted everything, and my mother had to look after him. But he was an amazing man. Nothing really changed in terms of the pace and the love for us that he had. So
I think it hit his earning power quite hard.
That hit his earning power very hard. They sold the house, they readjusted. But they they never really complained. It was extraordinary. I was struck by that approach they had when I don't know whether you heard last weekend Arnold Schwarzenegger saying very powerfully, I thought, to everybody complaining about Donald Trump, "Stop whining," he said. And in our family, there was very little complaining. There was very little reflecting. It was very much more about how we're going to make a success of tomorrow. And that was quite a powerful way to instill confidence in your family.
There's even a royal on your family tree.
Apparently.
Well, it's a bit like everybody would probably have
I
one
think
if you went back
everybody's-
far
yeah,
enough. But yours
yeah.
is at least known by name, I think.
Yeah.
One of Charles II. Well,
One of
II.
Charles II's mistresses.
And him.
And
Therefore him. They'd both be on the family tree.
The wrong side of the tracks, James.
Yes, there's probably still a title in it somewhere,
probably is.
wasn't there? And so were you? Did you go away to school?
Yes, I went to boarding school at aged 11.
That's young. I mean, possibly it's a generational thing. People, but my children's age balk at that, even if they've got friends at boarding school. 11 hits them as young.
No, I loved it.
Did you?
Loved it. I think that, it's a cliche, but it does depend on the child.
Yes, for sure.
I was child number 4. The other 2 girls had done it before me. And it was very much jolly hockey sticks and hard learning. It wasn't one of those girls' boarding schools that was all about sort of, learning how to write a check rather than an essay type thing. It was all about, how you can do in your A-levels. And my parents met at Oxford, which is unusual for a woman of that age, for my mother. And so they really pushed us all very hard on learning and achievements.
And would the expectations have been the same for you and your sisters as they were for your brother?
Completely.
That would have been quite rare.
Yeah,
as well
I think it
in
was
that
then.
era.
I think it was, but we were all expected to go to university, to do well, to fight our corner, to be ambitious. So that didn't feel different.
And I mean, being away from home, being away from the bosom of such a loving family, I never believe people when they say it was an entirely happy experience. Partly because I spent years believing it had been an entirely happy experience.
Of your own?
Yes. And
you went away to boarding school?
Yes, and then realised that it hadn't in many ways. It's not a natural way for a child to be treated.
Well, maybe I need to do a bit more therapy.
Well, this
James,
is
I think I'm going to stick to my story that I rather enjoyed it. I mean, I left at O levels as we had then,
right,
and came back to London to to be a teenager.
Okay,
and that was fun, but it felt like, it felt good to me. It was my truth. Sorry, I mustn't mob people up like that, but still.
Were you good at school? Were you bright? I mean, you were a top student, top of the class, or there or thereabouts?
Absolutely not top, but hardworking, competitive. I'm always competitive in everything I do, and that drives you to work hard. Even though I wasn't sort of scholarship or the brightest, I just still worked hard.
Good at games?
Good at games, yeah. Pretty good at games. Good enough to just about make the house team, but not the school team, all that sort of stuff.
I understand these distinctions, and you sound very convincing as one of the people, as you say, for some children. You just sail through it unscathed by the sort of emotional weirdness of it all.
We had my parents were very very loving and also very busy, and they so we weren't necessarily going to be the kids who were taken to all the activities after school because my mother was supporting my father, and so they need their own time as well. And I saw that in myself too with my children, is that if as an adult you're having quite a serious career life, it's an easier choice to make for your children to be at boarding school, and if they're enjoying it, they can probably work that out and understand the trade.
Yeah, no, of course. Jumping ahead a bit, it strikes me that you are part, privilege aside, we're all pretty much living through generations for the first time in history where children are going to be less financially well off than their parents.
Yeah.
Which is quite a strange situation to find ourselves in.
Yeah, it is hard. It is hard that. Are you referring to the whole sort of...
I was thinking about all 3 generations of your family. Your children are unlikely to be as financially comfortable as you are because of your earlier career in the city, and you probably haven't ended up as well off as your parents were.
No, actually, that's not true.
Is that not true?
No, we've all kind of lived well, but slightly by the seat of our pants.
Okay, yeah, it's a bit Micawber.
Yeah, a bit just within the inside of Micawber. And that's that. But you have to work hard as well. But also coming back to your point about privilege, I do think I'm very aware of my privilege in terms of my schooling and the advantages that gave. And I think the whole emphasis of government on opportunity and social mobility, which is in all political parties, is consciously trying to give other children that opportunity.
Where did the social equality interest kick in? How young were you when? Is it because of your mum and the magistrate's work, or?
I think that it's about being more aware of people around you, and then I think that for me it didn't really sort of land powerfully until I became an MP.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, when I became an MP, the extraordinary thing about our system, as you know, is you're much more engaged with the public than people appreciate. You spend so much of your time in your constituency.
You don't have to, but you chose to.
I definitely chose to. And I don't know what you say you don't have to. I think...
Well, some MPs don't. I always forget who it was, and I don't want to malign anyone, especially posthumously, but it may have been Tony Benn who didn't think that constituency surgeries were the kind of meat and drink, food and drink of being a politician. He was much more of a parliamentarian. So you don't. I mean,
that's changed.
Yeah,
I mean, that's changed. It was the Lib Dems really who changed it.
Oh, was it?
Because they were such good campaigners that if you had an MP, Conservative or Labour, who was a bit slack about campaigning for a new bus stop or sorting out the potholes, they were in there. So everybody now is a campaigner locally. And
Hastings and Rye had quite a lot of poverty as well.
Yeah. I mean, it was a really good constituency for me in terms of getting to know the schools, the public meetings I held, and the fact that it wasn't, a big Conservative majority type place was also very good for me. I had to fight for every vote.
Let's back up a bit. If I'd met you, say, when you were 16, just as you left boarding school and came to Sixth Form College in London, and I said, what do you want to be when you grow up? What would you have said?
I've got no idea, I would have said. I had no idea. And if you'd said to me, I hear you might be a politician, I'd have laughed in your face.
Oh, really?
It hadn't registered with me then. At that age, before university, really, didn't have a plan. I mean, and when I left university, I was still thinking, what on earth am I going to do? I had no idea. But I was excited about life. It felt like there were so many opportunities and interesting things to do.
What were the big changes when you left Cheltenham Ladies College and started living at home again, went to Queen's College in London? I presume there was ample opportunity for naughtiness.
James, I couldn't possibly comment
you have to.
on those
hold your feet to the fire.
Depths of depravity
but
that were going on in
Cheltenham's
London.
My school was in the middle of nowhere. I know Cheltenham quite well, and so you are in town. I mean, you're not isolated. It's not like a nunnery. But presumably there was a bit of a culture change when you moved to London.
Yeah, it was great fun. We were in a house in London with my sister, who was a year older than me, and my brother, who was 2 years older than me, although he was just starting university. No, he was resitting his A-levels at that time. But, we were all sort of this big family sort of mucking around, going out to parties and also working hard. I mean, I worked very hard on my A-levels.
Have you always found it quite easy to work hard?
Yes, but I don't always do very well. I just apply myself a lot because I am competitive.
So you'd be comparing your A-level results to your sister's and your brother's A-level results?
Yes.
What did your parents want for you, do you think?
They wanted us to go to university and, try and get good qualifications. And after that, I suppose be sort of active members of society, go to the church, which we all did.
Oh, really?
We were active members of our local church. I became, later on, the church treasurer.
Well done.
Raising money for a church roof is an experience everybody should try to do.
Yes.
And that was an important part of our family culture.
What about honour, Amber? What about the kind of... Because we talked about normality and its relationship with modern politics, but I often cite you as an example, I don't know whether it's accurate or fair, as probably the last really prominent example of an integrity-driven resignation, arguably two, of course. Was that something that your parents inculcated? Or... I
think it must have been. I mean, I did feel that at every moment in politics, really, that am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing by what I believe in? and what is best for my constituents and constituents when you're an MP, and then as the Secretary of State, the whole country. And I do think that I'm trying to articulate this without sounding too self-aggrandizing. But I do think that honour does play a role. Honour is quite a grand word, but I suppose I mean personal integrity. So if you feel that you cannot do this, then you shouldn't be there.
Were you surprised by how rare that view was when you arrived in Parliament?
I think it's fair to say I wasn't looking around at that stage.
Okay.
It didn't feel the question. And one of the reasons that the last 2 or 3 years for me in politics, sort of 17, 18, 19, was so difficult was because you had to ask yourself that question the whole time. Am I doing the right thing today? Am I with the right people? Do I belong over here? Do I belong over there? Am I being true to what I believe in? Or do I just want to stay as Secretary of State? If I give up as Secretary of State, if I actually resign, you've left the game. And it's very unusual to come back. I did come back once, but it's very unusual.
I don't know if envy is quite the right word, but is there any sense of envying people who seem to be untroubled by these sort of...
Yeah. There is. And
it must be quite liberating.
Yes, lucky them. Lucky them not feeling that they have to resign because they don't believe in this. I do find that quite extraordinary. And some of these people, they're not villains.
Right.
They're just people who just say, oh, come on now, but don't take that so seriously.
It's just a game, perhaps.
They view it more as a game. Yeah. They view it more as a game, and they don't feel that their own personal integrity is attached to that decision.
Okay.
And I think I felt that when Boris Johnson was elected as Prime Minister, and there was that film of his cabinet all saying, yes, 40 new hospitals, yes. And I don't think any of them could have believed it. And that made me feel, thank goodness I'm not there.
It feels almost pedestrian given what's happened since, more so, I suppose, on the other side of the Atlantic, but they feel almost like nostalgic fibs.
Yes, they were so small by comparison.
Yes, in the great scheme of things.
Yeah.
But you can't, I mean, these people are your friends as well as your colleagues, past and present.
Yes.
So you can separate the two. You can look after your own integrity, but not necessarily be sententious about other people's lack of it.
It's true. I mean, when I, just on those resignations then, is that I still have people, colleagues then and sort of sometimes strangers who come up to me and say, oh, you shouldn't have resigned. And they're wrong because you come to a stage when you are personally challenged about whether something is right or wrong, and it is and you're in a very public place, that you've gone as far as you can, and you know it. And people used to say this to me, you'll know when you can't do it anymore. And I'm like, really? How do you know?
And you just do.
You just do.
I might be one of them. I think you could easily have got away with the Windrush one.
But look at your language, James. Got away with the Windrush.
Okay, no, forgive me. I don't mean got away with. I think that I believed you when you said that you hadn't been aware of this information and that there is a difference between an ambition and a target and various other, I don't think, semantic games. I think you could have, let's say, emerged from that with your integrity intact and your job.
I don't agree.
No,
because
clearly.
Every time I went back to the House of Commons, I had to adjust. And you can't keep doing that and saying, when I said this yesterday, what I meant was this.
But you always spoke according to the facts as you believed them to be.
But the information I was being given was just wrong. And by the time you've done that 2 or 3 times, it's untenable, I felt. And I couldn't go back in the next day and say, I've got to adjust again.
I mean, that's why it's so impressive. Because so many people could have passed the buck. It's a bit of a parlour game, isn't it, to try and remember who has resigned over other people's mistakes or over other people's errors. You sort of got Carrington somewhere on the list after the invasion of the Falklands. There aren't many of you.
No. But I was, in the moment, I wasn't really thinking like that, as you can imagine.
Of course not.
But reflecting on it, I also think it was the right thing to do because something terrible had happened.
Yes. Yes.
The British state had treated a lot of people who were here legally as though they were illegal and done some terrible things. And I was not just thinking, how can I, navigate this? But I was sort of also learning daily about the horror of what had happened. And so part of needing to resign felt to me that it was necessary for somebody to move, to leave, to resign, to take responsibility for what had happened.
I'm just thinking about the sort of theoretical coma patient who's sort of woken up. And just almost sounds as if you're speaking about a different century, not just a different period of British politics.
Yes, it's certainly changed since then.
The idea, and we'll talk later about your second resignation, which is probably even more emblematic of the shifting sands of domestic politics in the aftermath, for my money, in the aftermath of Brexit. But let's go back. Edinburgh for university, so you're putting quite some distance between home and you,
yes.
and also a 4-year course, so you can get properly stuck in.
Yeah, well, Edinburgh is 4-year courses as the Scottish system, and rented a house with some friends and studied history and did a fair amount of debating. There I am, getting started.
What's the debating like at Edinburgh? Because I've got a daughter at Trinity in Dublin, and they have a great time doing it in a way that seems to be more fun than perhaps it is at Oxford. I don't know.
Definitely. Edinburgh was just a great fun. We did sort of we had a reunion the other day, actually, some friends and I who'd been there at the same time, and they all seemed to remember that I'd done debating. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. I tucked into quite strongly in those days.
You were the proposition, were you, on that one?
I was dangerous. I was very forward feminist, which was not quite as common as it is now.
No, and you hadn't done any of that at school, so you discovered this string to your bow when you got to university.
Yeah, no, at Cheltenham I'd done some debating.
Right.
I was warming up to it.
But still, no political ambition. You didn't get involved in student politics.
Nope.
Should probably be an exclusion, shouldn't it? For anyone involved in student politics, should be banned from getting involved in national politics.
Well, I mean, I go around universities quite a lot now, and sort of sixth form colleges, and talk to people about getting involved in politics, and they all say to me, "How do I do that?" And I say, "You don't have to join a party. Just get involved in the things that will bring you into politics. So join a local charity, join a national charity, be an activist, do things, but you don't actually have to choose a party."
When did you feel things crystallising then, in terms of, because we'll go over the path you took, but just in terms of what was happening inside you rather than what you were doing? When did you feel political ambition begin to crystallise?
Well, I'd always been interested in politics.
Right.
We talked about current affairs, and I had a few friends who were sort of loosely involved in politics. But it was when my children became older that I thought that maybe this was something I could try to find my way into. And it felt like a very distant prospect. I mean, if you'd asked me then, perhaps when I was about 40, it must have been.
Right.
Are you actually going to go into politics? I would have probably said, I'm going to try.
Okay.
Because it still felt like a very out of reach ambition. But I do also think, and this is a personal thing, because I don't want to put off other women who are looking at it, it's quite a difficult thing to commit to if you've got young children and you haven't got a partner or a husband. And by that point I was on my own, and my children did go to boarding school for a while, but it's still, a big responsibility, and I didn't want to not be there for them the whole time, which is what politics can become.
You mentioned being on your own. That's because your first husband, Adrian Gill, A.A. Gill, sort of upped and left in fairly unceremonious circumstances.
That's exactly what he did. He upped and left, yes, when the children were 2 and 4, and it was hard. And I think personally, I sort of slightly, my 30s were hard. I was sort of finding my way through financially, earning my living, trying to bring up the children, trying not to be heartbroken, which is what I was.
Out of nowhere. I mean, you thought everything was okay, and then suddenly he's off. But for people who don't know, he became a journalist of extraordinary repute, absolutely quite brilliant writer. But it must have been tough for you to read his flowery language about the woman he left you for.
Yes, being in love with a beautiful woman. Yes, it was very hard at the time, and I I was very unhappy about it. But again, I come back to, I suppose, to family. My family were amazing. My parents lived nearby. My brother and sister, we all supported each other. And that was important to me.
How sad do you let yourself be? Because I'm conscious of what you said about school and what you said about how you were raised and family. And I don't like the phrase jolly hockey sticks, but I think stiff upper lip is probably more accurate. How sad do you let yourself be in those moments?
I was very sad.
Right.
And I didn't pretend otherwise. And I did go into therapy for a while so that I wasn't just sobbing on my friend's shoulders, but sobbing on a professional's shoulders. So I needed that, and it was a hard period. And I would say that my 20s were incredibly busy. I was either getting married, pregnant, having a baby, or getting divorced for about 5 or 6 years, basically. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it was frantic. And then my 30s were much harder because I was trying to get over having been very much in love with Adrian. Yeah. But I just want to, for the record, if I may, is that, we did become very good friends.
Yes, I know.
Which was lovely and important because we had 2 lovely children.
Well, I was going to say, not least to your children. Was there a sense of failure? Because it's not something that you've had much in life.
Everybody feels a sense of failure when their marriage breaks up. Right. Whether it was your fault or not, you feel it like, how have I delivered this to my children? I remember my daughter coming back from school once and saying, she was really upset. And the teacher had said, are any of you from divorced families? Put your hand up. Put your hand up. Right? And she said, that's because, Flora's mummy and daddy don't love each other anymore. And the rest of you, they do. That's just how you can imagine gripping the chair with fury.
Hell hath no fury.
I know. But you do feel guilty. Yeah.
So you come out of Edinburgh, and were you set immediately? I mean, the financial path is not necessarily obvious, but it's certainly an option given what your father Tony did for a living.
Yeah, I was interested in the markets, but also, when I came out of university, then it was a time when the banks were really hiring. They were going on these milk rounds. Come to us. There was they were competing to recruit people at the top universities. Come and live in America for 6 months, and I thought, well, that sounds like a fantastic idea. So I did. So I joined one of the top American banks and started there. And it was fun.
And again, I mean, it was for a competitive high achiever, there weren't that many options, really. I wouldn't have thought. Because you want to be the best and you want to beat other people. And doing the milk round, I think it was called, and getting on one of the big ones. Was it JP Morgan that you went to?
Yes, that's right. Yep.
I mean, that was kind of the rubber stamp of success in that milieu.
Yeah. I mean, I'm afraid it's a very shallow truth about me, James. But it's true. I wondered where the most competitive, difficult place to go to was, and one of the American banks.
I did think that. I think that might be. But it's not a shallow truth at all. I mean, if you haven't got a vocation, you don't want to run off and be a missionary, then why wouldn't you try to make as much money as possible in the most exciting environment?
I mean, I don't want to dismiss it, but it wasn't just about the money.
No.
It was about being they basically trained you for a year. So you went into a kind of like a mini MBA in America. It was incredibly exciting.
And what were the other options? Did you ever think about journalism? Again, it would have been a
no, I didn't think about journalism. I applied lots of different places. I applied to the Foreign Office.
I was going to say, did you do that?
Yeah. I don't think I finished the paper.
Didn't get a nod, or didn't fancy it? Changed your mind halfway through?
No, I didn't get in. I didn't do proper prep for.
Fine.
I think I applied. I got a. Now this is a big disclosure.
Go on then.
I got a 2-2.
Good Lord.
I know, it's bad.
You must have been very busy.
Very busy. But when my daughter was at university and she thought she'd fluffed her exams, and she called me up in tears saying, I can't believe I've done so badly. It's going to be awful. I told her my truth.
That was the first time?
First time. I said, look, darling, I got a 2-2. Stopped her into silence.
What?
So I got to. So I couldn't do a number of things. I think I couldn't do a law conversion, which I thought might be fun. So I'd limited my choices, but the American banks didn't seem to mind.
Well, I was going to say that surprises me, because I sort of thought that they'd be looking very closely at your academic record.
No, they didn't seem to mind.
So what did they see in you that they liked so much?
Well, I'm not quite sure, really. They could see that I was an enthusiastic learner. And I think that, oh, yes, I remember. We were the first women who they'd recruited to go onto their trading floor.
Okay.
So I think they were looking for a certain confidence,
Yes.
resilience, perhaps.
Which you would have needed, because I think you've spoken about some of the more perhaps Me Too era behaviour that you witnessed.
The porn.
The porn. Yeah, it's a horrible story.
Yeah. Well, we were all bullied in those early days by the traders, but the women were bullied and had a sort of sexual connotation.
So given a stack of porn videos and asked to watch them and give a senior male colleague a review.
Yeah, that's right.
Did you do it?
Did I watch the videos?
Yeah.
Yeah, I put them in the ching, they go in the video machine, and I remember watching a bit of them with my sister and thinking it all looked a bit uncomfortable.
Implausible.
Really. Implausible. And the next day, giving them back to the head trader, who just laughed and I laughed, and that was it.
Yes. Again, this is stuff that could affect some people retrospectively quite deeply, but it doesn't seem to have affected you.
No, didn't affect me.
Because you sort of strap on your armour and go to armour and go to work.
Yes, exactly. But also, there was a young man who was my age who was, they did some joke about him. They pretended to be from a rival bank. They watched him while he picked up a call from somebody pretending to be from a rival bank, offering him a job, and him saying, well, maybe, and them all getting furious because he was already paid, they thought, too much. So it was a bullying environment. Yeah. And we all sort of compared notes, and it was like the American hazing type thing.
And the sense that it had to be, that slightly anachronistic notion that it was character forming and necessary, which I suppose some people still think that about boarding school as well. You have to become a survival type of personality in order to get through it, and that makes you better at doing the job.
Yeah, I think that the banks and all those organisations have completely changed.
Yes.
Completely changed.
You worked for a few. You jumped around a bit, I think, did you? In sort of venture capital.
Yeah, that's right.
So what was the aim? Was it, winning things and making lots of money?
No, that wasn't me.
What was it?
I basically left JP Morgan after, I think it was 2.5 years, because I couldn't see the point of it. And
money for money's sake.
Yes,
didn't
exactly.
Appeal to you.
Just buying this, selling that wasn't for me. And I went into venture capital, which then I found much more interesting. How do we keep businesses afloat? How do we help them raise money? How do we help them put the right people in? What are they doing? All that area was much, much more interesting. And then I sort of discovered, I think, what became perhaps the foundations of me going into politics, which is enormous admiration for people who mortgaged their houses, took these risks, set up businesses, employed people, whether it's 20 people or 200 people. It's an enormous responsibility. And that really, I think, formed, when I look back on it, some of the political positions I took.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because, left-right dichotomies these days are so steeped in culture war and confusion that it's sometimes hard to remember points of genuine principle that define those distinctions, and the idea that the entrepreneur, the wealth creator, the employer is somebody that governments should really be looking after better.
Completely. And getting out of the way for as well. Yeah. That's a very conservative thing, although, Gordon Brown used to talk about enterprise the whole time.
Yes.
But the fact is, for me, it's what sort of drove me towards the Conservative Party when I was thinking about politics.
Were there other contenders? Was it not an immediately obvious
No, it was.
choice?
It was. Didn't take very long for me to think about it. And I think in my sort of consciousness as well, there was Margaret Thatcher. I've always been very conscious of women having to work harder to be taken just as seriously. And, well, look, I went into JP Morgan where there weren't many women at senior level anyway. And having seen Margaret Thatcher succeed as a woman politician meant a lot to me.
2010 is when you went in. When did you start trying? Because you were a headhunter for a while as well, weren't you?
Well,
is that a similar impulse? You want to find the people who
yes, it's part of that whole thing. Yeah,
you're like jigsaw. You're a jigsaw person,
like a Rubik cube.
Yeah,
trying to make it fix it all together, and admiring people who really deliver and who create those leadership opportunities. Really, so I enjoyed being a headhunter too. So I fought in 2005 in the election in a Liverpool seat. The Conservative Party supported me going up to fight a no-hope seat. And as they say, the voters fought back. And I made absolutely no progress at all for the Conservative vote in Liverpool Garston. But it was interesting because it's the first time you go door to door asking for votes, talking to people, and that's when you discover really whether you really enjoy this or not.
And you did.
And I did.
Why?
Exactly. Well, Liverpool, in a way, was a kind of... Because the Conservatives were as rare as unicorns,
Yes.
people were incredibly nice to me. Oh, hello, dear.
It's like a novelty value.
Exactly. Come in. So I enjoyed it.
They had a soft spot for Heseltine up there, didn't they?
They certainly did.
Yes.
They loved him. Can you get Heseltine up here? Poor Michael, he was always being asked to go up there.
So this is now very much what you want to do next.
Yes.
You come back from Liverpool thinking, okay,
I'm going to do
next
this.
time round.
Yes. How do I get noticed?
I want a winnable seat.
Exactly. And then...
How do you get noticed?
Well, I did some work for the Conservative Party. I volunteered to do some project for them on the city seats, they called it, Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, how we'd done, how we could have done better. And so I went around presenting that to the senior people in the Conservative Party. Oh, that's interesting. What's Amber got to say? And then I got on David Cameron's list. He put together a list of 100 candidates who could be selected for the best seats as they started to select ahead of the next election. And his approach, instead of having a women's shortlist, was to have 50 men and 50 women on the basis that if the associations interview women, they will have to select them. And it pretty much worked. So I got onto that list and then I managed to get selected in Hastings and Rye.
Had your orbits crossed before, you and David Cameron? Did you move in similar circles?
I saw him occasionally in church
Right.
because we were both attendees at the same church. But apart from that, no.
Okay. Because I'm interested in your social life, which we've glossed over. You ended up as an aristocracy coordinator on 4 weddings and a funeral.
Okay, that is my guilty secret.
It's not a secret.
That is true.
Is it?
No, I know it's not. But it didn't really come out when I was in politics.
Did it
which
not?
is a good thing. Yeah.
Yes, that probably is quite a good
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
What did that involve?
So it was when I was on maternity leave with my second child. A friend of a friend called me up and said, we're doing a small British film and we need some aristocrats in the background. And you're about the 5th person I've asked. Do you think you can help? And I thought, what are we paying these aristocrats? And he said, we're paying them £100 a day, which was 30 years ago.
Yes.
And I said, no problem.
Yes. Distressed aristocrats.
Exactly. And so I started calling friends up and said, would you like to be in the background in this film, an extra? And that's what happened. And so half my friends, and indeed my parents,
They're
are
there
in the
as well.
churches for these things.
So that was just, friends from university, friends from
Yes.
Cheltenham Ladies
Yes.
College, friends from your
Yeah.
time in the city, just sort of...
Friends of friends. Word got out. You could get £100 with Amber.
Not bad, is
Dress
it?
up nicely.
Yeah.
Equity weren't very happy.
No, of course not. And little did you know what an enormous success it would be.
No.
Do you work on your friendships? I mean, that speaks of somebody who's cultivated, taken care of friends over the many years.
Do I work on my friendships? I'm not sure. I mean, I'm back with my friends. By what that I mean is that there's one of the things about politics, senior level politics, is you stop seeing your friends for a few years.
Yeah.
And then when you sort of, get ejected or fall out of it, you look around and you think, where are they? And the great thing is they're very forgiving. So
Forgiving of your absence. Yes.
Exactly. And so they come back. And so, yeah, I have a lot of good friends. I feel very lucky.
It's important, I imagine. And you sort of, when you come to the business of wound licking and returning to
Yes.
normality.
Yes, it is. But also, again, I come back to this thing about my family are amazing. My brother, my sisters, we all support each other.
Come 2010, you've got a fair crack of the whip. Not a shoe-in, was it,
No,
Hastings and
no,
Rye? But
no.
I suspect you probably rather relished that more than
I
you
did.
would have done a massive majority to inherit.
I did. I worked very hard at it. And, some people were like, who does she think she is? She comes down here. But I rented out my London house, moved to Hastings and really lived there and my work was headhunting so I could come and go a bit. But it was nail-biting stuff getting to the election. David Cameron at the time was very committed to the green agenda.
Yes.
So he was saying, think green, vote blue. And I said, think green, vote blue, ditch brown, choose amber.
Very strong. That was your brother, was it? Or was that you?
No, that was me. That was me.
Just because that's what he did for a living.
That's what he was a PR man.
Yes,
that's right.
Exactly.
But it always made people laugh knocking on the door. But it was a nail biting night because I'd really thrown everything at this change in my life.
And did you feel, for the first time ever, that you were doing absolutely what you were meant to be doing?
Right. I did. I felt I had finally taken the driving wheel of my life and was pointing it and moving in a direction which I had chosen.
And what did you want to do? Why did you want to be a politician?
Well, the extraordinary thing about ambition, I discovered, James, is that you think all you want to do is become a member of parliament, represent your constituents, the people you've grown to love, and then once you're a member of parliament, you think, all I need to do is become a minister.
Right.
And then once you become a minister, you can see how this goes.
Yes, I've heard rumours.
But also, it's because anybody going to politics has an eye on the levers of power. Hopefully, 99% of the cases to do good things. They think they can improve the quality of people's lives. And once you're in, you want to get closer and closer to that lever.
And so it is linear ambition, really. You get in and you want the next rung and you want the next rung and the next rung. But in your case, because you wanted to do things with the levers of power, I think there's a lot of people in this era of politics, possibly more than other eras, where the levers were the point, the power was the point, not what you could do with it. But
I agree. And
to
as
get
you
your
said,
name on the honours board, as it were.
Hastings and Wright had some real challenges. And I knew that there were things that I could do being a member of parliament for a party in government, which would really change people's lives in Hastings. And there were things we did that I think, I don't know if they were lasting or not, but they felt to me worthwhile to have tried to do.
Did I detect a slight hint of cynicism when you described David Cameron as having been a big believer in green issues then?
Well, I mean, more the party, really. Yeah. The party's kind of swung away from it. The Climate Change Act, which was passed before the Conservative government, was passed by a majority of MPs, by all parties. There was a consensus on it, but as we know, consensus in so many ways has fallen apart, not least on climate change.
That ship has sailed. But that was the area, of course, in which you rose politically, wasn't it? It was where you got your first nod as a Under Secretary of State, and by 2015, you're Secretary of State.
Yeah.
Is that meteoric? Does that qualify as meteoric?
It was pretty fast.
Yeah.
And I say to people who ask me advice about getting into politics, is that you have very little control of some of the most important things in your career path when you're in politics. It was sort of it was a series of events that led to me being a junior minister in the coalition, because I was a junior minister to Ed Davey. And then when we won a majority, unexpected majority really, in 2015, they needed somebody who had some experience in the energy department. Oh, look, there's a junior minister there.
We've got one.
We've got one. So that made me Secretary of State.
So it is planets aligning and also being prepared to grab the opportunity when it arises. We'll talk about this period, but I'm also conscious of wanting to talk about your new project, the Crisis Room podcast, which you're doing with my old mate Mark Urban and a former CIA officer called Mark Polymeropoulos. But so we definitely will get to that. But this is now that mad period, isn't it? So you get Secretary of State in 2015. Bloody referendum gets called and you become a very prominent advocate for staying in the European Union in 2016. This is the point at which you become, for want of a better word, famous, really, because you do the television debate and you bite some fairly meaningful chunks out of Boris Johnson. So suddenly you're on the biggest stage. You're quite a big player on the very biggest stage.
Yes. I mean, 2015 was an incredible year for me because we had the Paris climate change agreements. UK was in the EU. We had a strong leadership role. All that informed why I was so clear that we should stay in the EU. We weren't one of 28. We were leading the campaign in the EU with some fantastic UK supporters from the Department of Energy and Climate Change. So when it came to the referendum, I was unequivocal that we were, I can hardly bear to repeat it, stronger, safer, better off by being in the EU. Well, so I threw everything I had at it.
And it didn't work.
No.
Why? I mean, I know we could sit here for several hours having that conversation, but do you have any favourite
Yes.
answers
I don't think we told a story.
at all.
We got, and James, I think you know a little bit about this, we all got a bit angry
Yes, speak for yourself.
and did our best, tried to win people over. But I think that comparing the different campaigns, their story appealed to the British public in a way that we didn't manage to reach them.
You could have told the truth and a good story, as opposed to a load of nonsense and a good story, which is
But you can't win without a good story.
No, and it was always on the back foot, wasn't it? It was always reactive rather than, as you say, proactive. Which telling a story is a proactive thing to do. So,
but also it was close.
Well, it
we
was.
mustn't beat ourselves up too much.
Well, I mean, looking back, I'm surprised how close it was when you look at the gulf in attitude between the two sides. It should really have lost by lots more. But it didn't do you any harm. You come out of it Home Secretary, effectively, as we've discussed.
And that was a huge surprise to me.
Was it? Why do you think she appointed you?
Well, first of all, I thought that after we were leaving the EU, after the vote came through, that my political career was over.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'd thrown everything at staying in. How could I be part of? I just thought it was it. And so, but also remember that after the result came in, politics was a bit unhinged for a while.
Yes. Yeah.
David Cameron resigning.
Do you think he should have done?
I don't think he had any choice.
You don't?
Because I can see, knowing the Conservative Party as I do and what happened then, that if he hadn't left then, they would have pushed him out.
Yes, of course.
Very quickly
Yeah, I
afterwards.
think I agree. I was just
So
interested in what you thought.
Took control.
There's
It's
a lot of that going on.
So I think that I don't know why she appointed me, Theresa May. I think we didn't have a close relationship. I didn't really know her, but I think I'd earned a reputation for being somebody who was trustworthy. And she, the Home Office was her home, really. She'd made it such a part of who she was. I think she wanted somebody she felt she could trust.
It's probably my turn for a confession now. I was the person who pointed out the similarities between your 2016 conference speech on immigration and Mein Kampf.
Oh.
That was an odd speech to make. I mean, particularly the lists of foreign workers.
No, that was a terrible thing for me to have said. But it wasn't. When you say my speech, it was in the speech, but it wasn't the speech. It was a small piece of it, and I should never have had it in there. But it's a good example of how you're not allowed to make a mistake in politics. There was some cartoonist put out pictures of me guiding people in with the Star of David on them. I mean, it was brutal.
Yeah. Do you think, twice in this interview, I've wondered whether things that have happened to you would have happened if you'd actually been in politics for longer. I wonder whether you would have resigned over Windrush if you'd had 20 years on the back benches, because you'd have thought, well, everyone's allowed a mistake, and whether or not that kind of thing would have crept through.
No, I think that sort of thing does. Well, I don't know where that creeps through.
Sure.
People make mistakes, but you have a point that I do sometimes think that a more experienced politician might have been able to navigate these things. And certainly one senior politician said to me after I'd resigned over Windrush that I'd missed a trick. I should have just called an inquiry. Call an inquiry. Nobody's going to talk about it for 3 weeks, 3 months. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. But I still come back to the fact that the Windrush disgrace was a different magnitude.
When I was refreshing my memory before sitting down today about that, I was struck by how unremarkable elements of that speech would be in current discourse, which is quite depressing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. You're absolutely right. And I've thought about that as well. The discourse has moved so far on from then.
Towards nativism, towards kind of...
towards more extremes, basically, yes. And that also reflects the fact that illegal immigration, asylum seekers have entered the public consciousness in a completely different way. And, just as an example, in my last year as Home Secretary, 2018, 300 people came across the Channel. So it wasn't part of people's concerns. There weren't huge numbers in asylum seeking, in asylum hotels. The costs weren't what they were. It was a different environment.
Because there were safe routes, partly, and the processing could be done
more effectively. There were safe routes. There were returns.
Yes. under the Dublin Agreement.
Under the Dublin Agreement. I mean, there were tiny numbers.
I know, and always negligible, but still,
but
the
there
door
was
was
something
open.
going on there.
It was possible.
But people were not coming across the channel.
You don't miss it, do you?
I miss parts of it, but I
Right.
don't miss the overall
No.
part of it. No. I mean, I think I miss it, and then I remember the rest of it.
Yes.
Waking up and having the journalists outside your house, working out every day in the last, few months, few years, what was the right thing to do? What was the honourable thing to do? What was the fair thing to do? And, it was quite intense.
And then the sort of final chapter in your parliamentary career is the resigning from Boris Johnson's government.
Yeah.
Because he was lying. Well, not quite.
No, there was definitely lying was going on. But the bit that made me resign was that the no-deal Brexit, i.e. leaving the European Union without a deal at all, would be so damaging to all those businesses we've been talking about, all those employers who risked their lives, their mortgages, their houses, their families to build businesses. If we left with no-deal Brexit, that would have been catastrophic for them.
Yeah.
And so I knew that I belonged with the team of people, the 21 people who he'd excluded from the Conservative Party, trying to stop no-deal Brexit. And the great thing is, James, we did.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was a worthwhile resignation from that point of view.
It's a weird one, though, because you mentioned Philip Hammond earlier, and in many ways he's even more emblematic of that pivot, isn't he? That you go from being Chancellor of the Exchequer to being deselected by your own party in the blink of an eye. It speaks of a madness that gripped the party and hasn't necessarily ungripped it yet.
Well, there was a particular madness about us all then. I mean, and there are many pages been written on this, but ultimately I think that you couldn't do Brexit at the time, or we failed to do it Brexit in a way that might have kept the party together and reflected the very small majority. In the end, it went to this extreme approach, which cut off so many of us.
And here we are.
Yeah.
Is the party facing existential threat at the moment?
I mean, I don't think so. People have said that about political parties at different times.
And they've been right sometimes.
That's true, but I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm still a member of the Conservative Party. I do various bits of activity. I hope it'll come back. I'm a member of my local branch in Suffolk, where I now live. So I think it'll come back, but I can't be sure. It's difficult times.
But there's no comeback for Amber Rudd.
No comeback for Amber Rudd.
Because you're busy doing things like The Crisis Room, which
Yes.
has a lovely subtitle, The Journalist, the Politician and the Spy.
Yes, that's it. This was the brilliant brainchild of Mark Urban, who came to the idea that if he had three experts focusing on one project from different angles, we might shed new light. And that's exactly what I think we do. He has all his incredible views and contacts and deep knowledge.
I can't tell you my Mark Urban story.
Yeah?
Is that I was sitting in the office at Newsnight and he poked his head around the door before anything had appeared anywhere. We were about to go on air about 20 minutes later and he just said, sorry to disturb you, but so the editor was in with me and he just said, I think that there might be a coup about to start in Turkey. That's what I love about the guy. That's what you're talking about.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. He has this very calm manner and
Doesn't he?
huge knowledge. So it's his idea to pull this together. And he called me up quite a long time ago now and said, I've got this idea. What do you think? And I leapt at it. I'd been asked to do a number of other sort of adventurous things or podcast things or whatever. But I knew that this was going to be different. And Mark Polymeropoulos, who's the ex-CIA intelligence officer, is also great because he's been on the ground. And the three of us, well, I just hope the public find it as interesting as we find each other.
Well, I probably shouldn't say this as a professional gob on a stick, but these are the most interesting podcasts when people have been in the room where it happens.
Yeah. Insight, really.
Yes.
Really different insight is what you're trying to offer.
Yes. And what do you get out of it? Why is it so enjoyable for you to do?
Well, James, I find myself inexorably drawn back to kind of security, defence, intelligence. It's just so interesting. And it gives me a way of participating, really, staying current while not actually having to be on the decision making. But I do also feel that this is, we've reflected in this conversation about how politics has changed, how the public, these different changes. And there is a big change taking place in terms of the stability of the UK and its need to defend itself. And a lot of people are saying this, and we are trying to reinforce that as well, that we are in a much more dangerous time than we've been before. And the UK itself needs to do better at defending itself.
So you sit down every week and you essentially pick over the crises that we are facing. So there's no shortage of material.
There is no shortage of material. Each week there's something else that's banging on the door wanting us to look at it and analyse it. And sometimes we interview people, sometimes we don't, but we try to offer something completely different, which is additional insight on the latest crisis.
Well, I'll trouble you for a little of that now. So, I mean, can you believe what's happening in the United States?
Yeah, no, that is particularly horrific with Trump bringing it. I mean, it's basically Trump against Gavin Newsom, isn't it? It's about each of them sort of positioning themselves and Trump trying to show that he is the stronger gorilla, as it were, in the pack. And, bringing in the National Guard and then the Marines is a big thing to be doing. I mean, there will be all sorts of different pieces of legislation that are in the way of a president being able to do that. And he's slowly bashing through each of them.
Deliberately.
Oh, yeah. And there is some chance that it will do as he hopes it will do, which is allow people to think more highly of him in terms of being tough on illegal immigration. It's very difficult to anticipate that. But it is dangerous times to see that taking place.
What should the UK government be doing with regard to that alliance, do you think Starmer's doing all right?
I do. I think Starmer's doing the right thing, trying to stay close to him. They are our, most important, biggest ally, and trying to make that work as well as he can for our security forces, for our defence, and for our, trade, our businesses, while keeping a certain distance on some of the more wayward things that the Trump is doing.
Apart from when you arrived in Parliament, you've not been an ambitious person really in your life. You had sort of.
I've not been a very successful person.
Well, you have been a very successful person, but you had sort of vague targets as opposed to that famous story about Michael Heseltine saying I'll be this by 30.
Yes, that was not me.
That was never you in a million years. Do you have any ambitions now?
I want this podcast to be a success.
It already is. You want it to stay a success.
I want it to stay a success because it is really interesting, and I think we're offering something different. And it's a great pleasure to work with the two Marks.
And as you look back over that, should we describe at the outset as a really quite extraordinarily short and bright period in frontline politics. You burned very briefly and very brightly. How much damage do you think Boris Johnson did to the country?
Well, it wasn't just Boris. I think that the inability to reconcile Brexit with the political party and what had been offered and what was delivered created what was deliverable. These terrible fissures, and basically politicians more than ever, I feel, James, kept on saying things they couldn't deliver. I think that Brexit was part of that, but it became even more. And I think that Boris did do great damage by carrying on saying he could deliver things which weren't possible.
But you're still pals.
We're no longer on speed dial to each other, shall I say that? No, we're not particularly pals. But I also think, can I just say one more thing about politicians, is it takes courage to be a politician. I can ruin many a West London dinner party when people start saying, why are politicians so awful? Why do they all lie? I'm like saying, you try it.
Yeah.
It is hard. It is hard. It is public. It's difficult for your family. And so I'm not so quick to knock all politicians.
No, that's probably healthy. Also, you want to draw people towards the job as opposed to alienating.
We're in real trouble if young people give up on going into politics.
And on that note, final question, which only just occurred to me. What do you think has happened to Liz Truss?
I don't know what has happened to Liz Truss. When I was in government with her, she was Chief Secretary to the Treasury when I was in the Home Office when we were doing a spending review. We had really good conversations detailed conversations about the numbers, about what was reasonable, perfectly good professional conversation. Since then, I can't imagine she's able to have those sort of conversations with anybody. I don't know what's happened to Liz Truss. It's a great shame.
It's probably a podcast. Amber Rudd, thank you.
Thank you.